This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
You underestimate my power!
Feel the power.
Phenomenal cosmic powers!
Oh, I could feel it.
Now, we often think power comes from the direct responsibility that someone holds over others. And that's true to an extent, but it's not the whole truth. There are other types of power in existence. And two social psychologists, John R.P. French and Bertram Raven, they identified 5 types of power in 1959. And this may be familiar to you, if not the theory, then in practice, if you've had different bosses or worked with different leaders who've had very different styles yet been effective, the chances are that their power is coming from different power bases.
One of the issues that we as emerging leaders need to have a handle on is the types of power that we have at our disposal. What kind of tools do we have in our toolbox? You don't want to get stuck just using one type of power when you have lots of ways to influence the people around you. And stepping back more generally, French and Raven talk about power as social influence. The ability of the leader, person A, to do something or say something that will get the follower, person B, to comply, to change their beliefs, their attitude, or their behaviors. And one of the ways to do that is through coercive power. Briefly, coercive power is the leader's ability to punish a follower if the follower does not comply with an influence attempt. In other words, I have asked the follower to do something, and he or she has not done it, and so I give them a punishment. Coercive power can also be the threat of punishment. Certainly that is an aspect of coercive power. They know, because I've said, if you don't do this, X is going to happen, then you want to avoid that punishment, and so the power works.
Abort, abort, abort! Brace yourselves! Everybody calm down. Now I'll tell you what we're not gonna do. We're not gonna panic, we're not gonna... Look out! We are not gonna die. Now both of you will get a grip, or so help me, I will ground you for a month. Understand?
A really important aspect of coercive power, and that is it requires surveillance. The leader has to keep track of whether or not people are complying. They have to build systems of surveillance and control to make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, because we will not comply if we think we can get away with it, like the speeding ticket. So it really is a kind of labor-intensive, high-maintenance approach for leaders to use. If you spend all your time investing in this coercive power, punishment, and surveillance, it's time you could spend doing something else. So reward power, quite simply, is the leader's ability to mediate rewards, to give a reward or withhold a reward for compliance of the follower. Now, on the one hand, a reward can clearly be something that the leader gives. So typically we think of things like a bonus, a raise, or some kind of other financial incentive as a reward. But a reward could also be something less tangible, like time off, or maybe some professional development opportunities, some mentoring. There are lots of rewards, and the types of rewards you give are really only limited by the leader's creativity. Now, on the other hand, a reward could also be something that the leader removes that the follower doesn't want in the first place. So some amount of work, for example, that you can take off their plate as a reward.
Are you finished? Well, thank you. How thoughtful. Would you like a chocolate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Oh, sorry, Sheldon. I almost sat in your spot.
Did you? I didn't notice. Have a chocolate.
Thank you. Then she had this bad nose job and basically wound up with 3.
You're here a lot now.
Oh, am I talking too much? I'm sorry. Zip.
Thank you. Chocolate?
Yes, please. Oh, hey, Kim. Yeah, you know what? Hold on. Let me take this in the hall.
You're using chocolates as positive reinforcement for what you consider correct behavior.
Very good. Chocolate?
No, I don't want it.
Legitimate power comes from the follower's acceptance of the right of the leader to require the changed behavior and the follower's obligation to comply. So essentially that means, in everyday language, when I, as a follower, accept this power arrangement, what I'm accepting is the legitimate power of the leader to take action, to make decisions. When I say things like, well, that person has the right to make the schedule, or I'm obligated, or I really should because they're in charge, when they use phrases like that, they're indicating legitimate power. So the leader came to power by some process, by some selection process, some election process, or perhaps tradition. And they occupy a certain position, and their power is tied to that position. So once a president leaves office, they're leaving that legitimate power behind because the power is connected to that particular job, that particular position. And once children are of a certain age, they become adults, they're no longer under the legitimate authority of parents because they are adults after that. And that's really the nature of this power. It's tied to a position.
I'm listening.
Well, I've narrowed your choices down to 5 unthinkable options. Each will cause untold misery.
I'd pick number 3.
You don't even want to read them first?
I was elected to lead, not to read. Number 3.
Expert power results from the follower's faith that the leader or expert has some superior insight or knowledge about what behavior is best under the circumstances. So if we were to verbalize it, if we were to think out loud, we would think a little bit like this. My supervisor has had a lot of experience with this sort of thing, and so she or he is probably right, even though I don't really understand the reason. And I love how French and Raven add that phrase, even though I don't really understand the reason, because that's why it's expertise. The person in power, the strength of their expertise comes from the fact that they have some kind of special knowledge that we may not have. And so we're looking to them for guidance. And so in that way, this type of power depends upon the follower's acceptance that the leader has the right expertise and their knowledge, judgment, and opinions can make a difference in this particular case.
You're telling me you can only give our guys 45 hours? That brings them to about there. Gentlemen, that's not acceptable. Gene, we gotta talk about power here. Whoa, guys! Power is everything.
Power is everything.
What do you mean?
Without it, they don't talk to us, they don't correct their trajectory, they don't turn the heat shield around. We gotta turn everything off. Now. They're not gonna make it to re-entry.
What do you mean, everything?
With everything on, the LEM draws 60 amps. At that rate, in 16 hours, the batteries are dead, not 45. And so's the crew. We gotta get them down to 12 amps. How many? You can't run a vacuum cleaner on 12 amps, John. You gotta turn off. We have to turn off the radars, cabin heater, instrument displays, the guidance computer, the whole smack.
Whoa, guidance computer? What if they need to do another burn? Gene, they won't even know which way they're pointed.
The more time we talk down here, the more juice they waste up there. I've been looking at the data for the past hour.
That's the deal?
That's the deal.
Okay, John. The minute we finish the burn, we'll power down the limb.
All right.
Gene Cairns is the legitimate leader on the ground, but he defers to John because of his expert knowledge of the ship's power supply.
Referent power has its basis in identification, a feeling of oneness a follower has for a leader. They feel a sense of identification or have a desire for that oneness. So if I were to boil this down even further, I would say that the leader is a model that the follower wants to emulate. They like the leader, they want to be like the leader. And so that's the source of power. Just like we might look up to an older brother, like I really look up to my older brother, and I was willing to go along with just about anything that he said or did because I wanted to be like him when I got older. Referent power functions a little bit like that. So if we were to verbalize this is the way French and Raven would verbalize it. I really admire my supervisor and wish to be like him or her. That's the way you might hear it spelled out if you were to think out loud. Now, we don't often say it like that in our head, but that's how we act it out.
If the so-called Negro in America was truly an American citizen, we wouldn't have a racial problem. If the Emancipation Proclamation was authentic, we wouldn't have a race problem. If the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution were authentic, we wouldn't have a race problem. If the Supreme Court desegregation decision were authentic, we would not have a race problem. But you have to see that all of this is hypocrisy. These Negro leaders are running around telling the white man that everything is all right, that we got everything under control, that everything the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches is wrong. But I'm telling you, Mr. Muhammad said these things were going to come to pass, and now these things are starting to come to pass.
So unlike some of the other types of power, I really think that referent power is special in that as emerging leaders, we have almost a limitless capacity to expand our referent power by being role models. We want to become the kind of people that others look up to, and that will expand our influence in lots of positive ways.
The idea that these types of power differ in their degree of internalization. Rewards and punishment tend to be more temporal, where the referent and the expert tend to be a little longer lasting.
Legitimate power typically doesn't bring about commitment. If you routinely employ legitimate power, it can bring about compliance. Sometimes it can bring about resistance. One time I witnessed something that was very telling when I was a young officer in the military, in that I saw an individual who constantly was bossing people around, and he was constantly threatening them with, if you don't do the following, I'm going to make sure that this happens to you. So very big on using legitimate, very big on using coercion. So what started to transpire were people did exactly what he told them to do. But they knew there were countless other things that were implied but weren't specifically stated, and so they elected only to do the things that were stated and to ignore the things that were implied in service of accomplishing the task. And the individual became more and more upset, and he's like, well, why didn't you do this, this, and this? And they said, well, that's not what you told me. And so it was a clear example of how legitimate and coercion, while efficient, might not lead to effective outcomes, because individuals have to fill in the blanks with a lot of things in order to bring about successful organizational achievement. If you want to get at achieving commitment, the two power bases that most often lead to that outcome are expert and referent. Expert because people can really see, hey, this individual has a deep understanding of what is required to be successful. And referent because if an individual opens himself up to another's influence, it's because they have determined this person will take care of me.